Are you a workplace deviant? Well, do you check Facebook, text your friends, and waste time surfing the net while at work? Yes, you probably do. But that doesn't make you a deviant. But you could become deviant if your workplace monitors every behavior that you engage in and forces you to hide these activities that we all do at work. You could become deviant if you're treated with disrespect, and in response you treat others with disrespect, or if you hide knowledge from people in order to get ahead. The forces that create deviance at work are very, very strong. Now, I'm a psychologist, and I'm an organizational psychologist, and I like studying the dark side of organizational behavior. Now, quite often, people get interested in psychology because they want to engage in me search. They want to learn something about psychology in an effort to fix themselves. Now again, I like studying bad behavior at work. So am I engaging in me search? If so, that must mean that I'm a bad person who likes doing bad things to people. But that's not the case. At least I don't think it's the case. I don't study bad behavior work because I'm dark and evil. Rather, I've had experiences in my life that have led me to question how and why we treat each other badly at work. And I want to share some of those experiences with you today and talk about what it means to be working with people who aren't necessarily nice and friendly and courteous towards you, and what you can do about it. So here's how I became interested in studying workplace deviance. When I was a graduate student, way back in 1998, I was sitting in our graduate computer lab one day, working on a paper. And I had Word and SPSS open on my computer. And I was using these programs to analyze some data and write a paper. Now the phone rang, and I picked it up. And the person on the phone identified himself as being from the IT department at the university. And he told me that they knew that I had tried to access the student grades database and to alter a grade for a student. He then threatened to bring me up on academic integrity charges and have me expelled from the graduate program and from the university. Now, I had no idea what he was talking about. Ironically, my ability to use computers and to program computers was so bad that in first-year undergrad, I had to change majors because I couldn't pass an introductory computer science course. So clearly, they had the wrong guy. Now, this person went on to ask me what I was doing with Word and SPSS on my computer. I was astonished. How did he know what I was working on my computer at that very moment? I quickly looked around the room to see where the cameras were. How naive I was. I had no idea at the time that workplace surveillance goes well beyond cameras and can include things like monitoring every keystroke that you engage in on your keyboard, monitoring every website you visit, monitoring every email you send, and even tracking how long you're away from your desk. I later learned that the IT people had actually searched my office without my knowledge because they questioned me about a computer that was left behind by a former graduate student years ago. So here's why they invaded my privacy and threatened me. A few days before this call, I had simply forgotten to log out of a computer at the end of the day. And the investigation revealed that a professor had come in and used that computer to try and change a grade for a student. That's what triggered all the alarms and led to the threats against me. Now, in response to that event, I became extremely afraid and confused and thinking that my freedom was no longer in my control. And so I actually stopped logging into computers in this computer lab. I only worked on computers that other people had logged into. And I figured, well, they could know what was going on in the computer, but they wouldn't know it was me. And that was my first inkling that deviance begets deviance. And that experience has shaped everything that I've studied and everything that I continue to study to this very day. So I began to study the effects of close surveillance on employees and how that makes them feel and act. And what I learned, and from my own experience, is that when we monitor people closely, they are going to retaliate. And they're going to find ways to engage in even more deviance than the monitoring system is designed to prevent. So when you back people into a corner and you take away their control, people will find ways to seek out control. Again, usually by doing things that are worse than the monitoring is designed to prevent. So for example, call center employees who have their call times monitored will pick up a client call and quickly hang up to keep their call times down. Employees who are monitored by cameras will seek out dead spots where the camera's gaze doesn't reach them, and that's where they will go to engage in deviant behavior, often things like stealing from their employer in order to get back at them. So the bottom line is, when we take away people's control and their freedom, they will retaliate and find ways to get it back. Deviance begets even more deviance. Now, a few years back, I was invited to participate in a roundtable discussion with a group of knowledge managers. Now, these are people who are tasked with getting their employees to share their knowledge with each other freely. And all of these people were lamenting the fact that they had built these complex and expensive knowledge management portals, yet nobody was using them. So in essence, they built them, but no one came. A little while after that, I was invited to this organizational session on knowledge management, where the senior leaders of this very large organization were congratulating themselves on the fact that everyone in that organization shared their knowledge with each other freely. And they knew this because they had asked all of their employees to self-identify whether they had unique knowledge that needed to be shared, and very few did. Now, I thought to myself, I'm not so surprised that people didn't raise their hands and say, yes, I have unique knowledge that gives me power in this organization. I want you to force me to share it with everyone. Do we share our knowledge freely with others? Do you share your knowledge with others when asked? Maybe you do. But for most of us in organizations, where we're all competing for very limited resources, we do not. And I wanted to study why not. So rather than look at ways to increase knowledge sharing, my colleagues and I actually engaged in a number of studies looking at how and why people actively hide knowledge from each other. So think about the last time that you asked someone for knowledge, whether it was to help you at work or maybe to help you in a course. Did they give that knowledge to you freely? Or did they play dumb and say they just didn't know? Or did they promise to give you that knowledge at a later time and they never did? Or did they give you a piece of that knowledge but not everything that you needed to get your job done? How did that make you feel? I bet that you told yourself that if anyone asked you for knowledge, this person or anyone else, that you wouldn't share it with them. Deviance begets even more deviance. Now, I'm currently studying asshole bosses. Technically, we call them abusive supervisors. And I'm looking at whether working with asshole bosses, or sorry, I should call them abusive supervisors, triggers knowledge hiding in subordinates. So for example, I have a boss who's highly controlling, very critical of me, yells at me, takes credit for my work, And in response, I hide knowledge from him or her or from others. Now, it could be that because I hide knowledge, my boss is very frustrated with me, very upset, and so he or she behaves abusively towards me. Either way, it doesn't matter. Everything we do is interconnected. It's all a cycle. The challenge is how we break that cycle. Can we move away from deviance and create a new cycle of behavior, a better cycle of behavior? We can. And the way to do that is through trust. Trust breaks the cycle of deviance. Now, people do a lot of bad things at work. But it's not because we're all bad. Some of us are bad, but most of us aren't. But because we don't trust each other, we get caught up in these bad cycles of behavior that lead us to behave in ways that normally we would not. But if we can treat people with respect and give them trust, that is a much more effective way of controlling deviance than in designing all-encompassing surveillance systems to monitor their every behavior. If we can remove competitive pressures where they're not necessary and reward people for sharing knowledge as opposed to punishing them, that makes it okay for people to share their knowledge freely. And it builds a sense of trust amongst colleagues. Trust breaks the cycle of deviance. But engaging with trust is both very easy and very hard. The easy part is figuring out who you can trust and who you cannot. In essence, figuring out who is just by their very nature a bad person, and who, by circumstance or situation, is caught up in a bad cycle of behavior. And we have to look for evidence. Harold Kelly came up with a theory of causal attributions way back in 1967 that can help us. We have to ask ourselves, is this person we're dealing with always mean and nasty with me and mean and nasty with others? Are they mean and nasty outside of work? If the answer is yes to all of those questions, your response is clear. You need to get away from this person. Nothing you do is going to change their behavior. This is not someone you should trust. But if this person is only like that with me, and not like that with others, and not like that outside of work, maybe it's something you've done, and you can change your behavior and break that cycle. So simply looking for evidence usually leads us to the right conclusion about whether we can trust someone. That's the easy part. The hard part is engaging with trust, because trust implies vulnerability, and vulnerability is not comfortable. But the only way to break the cycle of deviance is to create a new cycle based on trust. Now, as I said, we shouldn't trust everyone, and we shouldn't be vulnerable to everyone. But engaging with trust to those who are not bad people, by treating them with respect, by sharing knowledge with them, serves to break that bad cycle of behavior that leads to deviance. We can break that cycle of deviance. We need to create a new cycle based on trust. Thank you.